So today we are going to learn how to solve quadratics by factoring. Now, x-intercepts have three different names: zeros, roots, and solutions. So anytime that they tell you to solve a quadratic, you're looking for the solutions, that's talking about the x-intercepts. So there are a bunch of different ways to solve quadratics if you do not have a graph, and today we're going to learn the first one, which is factoring. Now, this is normally a y right here, but we're going to replace it with 0, and I'm going to explain exactly why as soon as we finish this first example. Now, example 1 has already been factored for you. Factoring is when you turn it into those two sets of parentheses being multiplied together. So what we're going to do right here is put x minus 3 is equal to 0, and x plus 4 is equal to 0. Okay. So I always like to draw my line through my equal sign and put my arrow pointing at my x. I would just solve this one-step equation for each one. The opposite of a negative 3 is a positive 3. So that's going to cancel it out over here and gives me x equals 3. On the other side, I'm going to subtract 4. And that's going to leave me with x equals negative 4. And the way I would like for you to put your final answer is like this. You are going to draw a bracket, put 3 and negative 4 together in it, and then close the bracket. Now, I know a lot of you probably do not know how to draw these, and that's fine, because take a look at mine right there. If you just do like a squiggly line or something like that, that's fine by me. I understand what you mean. I also don't care which one of those numbers goes first. Okay. So why did this work? And I'm going to back up for a second and remind you of something that we talked about right before we went to spring break. This part you do not need to copy. I just want you to listen. Okay. If I have this problem, 2 times x equals 0, what does x have to be and why? Well, x has to be 0, and the reason why is because any time that you multiply two numbers together and get 0 for the answer, one of those numbers had to have been 0. Now, how does this help us find x-intercepts? Well, here's my equation for this guy. Whenever you are solving, if you look right here, I've got my x-intercepts at negative 2 and positive 7. The y value is 0. So that's why we take the equation and we replace the y value with 0. Now after that, we are going to factor the problem, and this one has 1, 2, 3 terms without a leading coefficient. So I find the numbers that multiply to give me negative 14 and choose the pair that adds to give me negative 5, which gives me this. And so now what we have is two things being multiplied together to equal 0. So I can set each one of those equal to 0 and solve, and then I would write my final answer just like this. And it is possible for you to check your answers just by plugging in the original problem into your calculator and looking at the graph. Okay, so join me now on example 2. This is what you're going to start copying again. Okay, once again, this one's already factored, and I know that it is because I can see that we've got a set of parentheses in here. Now, there's nothing between the 5x and the parentheses, which means it's multiplied, so it's kind of like if 5x had parentheses around it as well. So I'm going to put 5x equals 0, or the x minus the 2 equals 0. And then from here, all we need to do is solve. I'm sorry, my screen does keep freezing. I'll wait for it to stop. Okay. All right. So in order to solve this problem, the 5 is attached to the x, which means they're multiplied, so we are going to divide to make it go away, which gives me x equals 0. On this one, I'm going to add 2 to both sides of that equal sign, and that leaves me with x equals 2. So that means the x-intercepts are 0 and 2. Please make sure you realize the squiggly line brackets are not the same thing as parentheses. Parentheses represent the ordered pairs. These squiggly brackets mean this is a list of my answers. Okay, now I am going to show you how to check your answer on this one. If I typed it in the way that it looked to begin with, 5x times x minus 2, I can hit my graph button, and I can see we are crossing at 0 and 2 on the x-axis. Okay. Number 3 has also already been factored for us. So I'm going to take 2n minus 4 and set that one equal to 0. And I'm doing 3n plus 5 is equal to 0. Okay, so now we've got two-step problems, and remember you need to move the friend first, the friend being the one that's not attached to your letter. So I start this first problem by adding 4 to each side. So now I have 2n is equal to 4. From there, the 2 is attached to my n, so I divide both sides by 2, and I've got n equals 2. For the other equation, the one that's not attached is the positive 5, so we use the opposite sign to move that guy over. I've got 3n is equal to negative 5. From here, I need to divide both sides by the number attached to my n, and it looks like this one's not going to be a pretty number, so I'm going to type in negative 5 over 3, which gives me a decimal. I want the fraction answer, so math, enter, enter, negative 5 over 3. So the way I write my answer, I've got my bracket, I've got 2 and negative 5 over 3. Okay, now example number 4 is going to require a little bit more from us. This time it has not been factored, and I am dealing with 1, 2, 3 terms, so a trinomial without a leading coefficient. We need to start by finding the factors of the constant, the last number. Now that is negative 24, so I come over here, I do negative 24 divided by x and press second graph. Now this will give you a list of your factors. 1 and negative 24, 2 and negative 12, 3 and negative 8, 4 and negative 6. Now you know if you've got all of them, if you keep moving down and you repeat the same numbers again. Now if you've got one positive number and one negative, please remember that the negative sign could be on the other number. And whenever you've got your list of factors, you're doing the constant, you choose the pair of these numbers that adds to equal 5. And if I add negative 3 plus 8 together, that equals 5. So that means I have a minus 3 times a plus 8, and that is equal to 0. So we factored it on our own this time. Okay, so now that we've factored it, we can take those two sets of parentheses, a minus 3 equals 0 and a plus 8 equals 0, and solve the one-step problems. On the first one, all I need to do is add 3 to each side, and I end up with a is equal to 3. On the next one, I subtract 8 from each side of the equal sign, and that gives me a equals negative 8. So my solutions are 3 and negative 8. Okay, so since I had to factor this one, I'm definitely going to check it. I know that it says a squared, but I'm just going to do x squared in my calculator and hit graph. I can see it's crossing at positive 3 and negative 8. Okay. So now we are going to do solve the quadratics by factoring. We've got 3 terms with a leading coefficient. So remember, that does add in some extra steps when we are factoring. Now, because I would like to see how many of you actually watch this video before you ask me how to do these kinds of problems again, I would like you to come up in the top right-hand corner of your paper and draw me a smiley face right there. Okay, so when you've got 3 terms with a leading coefficient, the first thing you are actually going to have to do is multiply your first and last numbers together. So 2 and negative 28 give us negative 56. And I would come over here and find the factors of a negative 56. You can use your calculator. So negative 56 divided by x, and look at the table. So 1 and negative 56, 2 and negative 28, 4 and negative 14, and then if I keep moving down, I've got 7 and negative 8. Now I am looking for the pair of numbers that's going to add to equal this middle number. If there's not actually a number there, that means 1. So we're looking for the pair that adds to equal negative 1, which is right here. So I'm going to put in my parentheses x plus 7 times x minus 8. And remember, we're not actually done factoring because we do have that leading coefficient. Now I've got to take that 2 and divide both of them by it. Now, you always want to make sure that you check to see if this is going to reduce, or you will get this wrong. 7 divided by 2, math enter, enter, it's going to stay the fraction 7 over 2. And on the other one, when I do negative 8 divided by 2, that is negative 4. So that gives me x minus 4. Now, since we still have a fraction right there, we've got one more step to finish factoring. If there's a fraction, take the denominator, the number on the bottom, and move it in front of the x, so that we have 2x plus 7 times x minus 4 is equal to 0. Okay, so we had to do all of that work in order to solve or to factor this problem. Now we've got two sets of parentheses multiplied together to equal 0. So 2x plus 7 is equal to 0, or the x minus the 4 is equal to 0. All right, so first thing I need to do is move the friend over on this problem. If I'm trying to get x by itself, that means subtract 7 from each side. That gives me 2x is equal to negative 7. Then from here, I'm going to divide both sides by 2, and you always need to double check and see if this is going to reduce. Negative 7 divided by 2, math enter, enter, stays the fraction. So I've got x equals negative 7 over 2, and on the other one, I add 4 to each side, and I've got x equals 4. So to put my final answer together, I've got my brackets, I have the fraction, negative 7 over 2, and the whole number, positive 4. Okay, so we're going to do one more problem like that, just to make sure that you've got it all down, and you are going to be required to explain how to do one of the problems like examples 5 and 6, so that's why I'm going into a lot of detail. Okay, so number 6. I've got a trinomial again, 1, 2, 3 terms with a leading coefficient. So I start by multiplying the first and last numbers together, which gives me 18. So now I need to find the factors, and excuse me, that should be a positive 18 right there. It does make a difference. So I'm going to come over here and do 18 divided by x, which gives me this. 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. Now if I add those, I get 19, this is 11, and this one gives me 9. So none of those add up to equal negative 19. But when you have a positive constant, go above the error message to see more options. You could also have two negative numbers, negative 1 and negative 18. And if you add those two numbers together, that gives you negative 19, like in the middle right here. So I'm going to put x minus 1 and x minus 18. Okay, so now I've got that leading coefficient. I need to divide by it. So divide by 3, divide by 3. Double check, make sure that this doesn't reduce. So I'm doing negative 1 over 3, math enter, enter. Stays the same. So minus 1/3. And then I've got x minus 6. Okay. Since we still have a fraction in there, I've got another step where I need to move the denominator in front of the x. So that gives me 3x minus 1 times x minus 6 equals 0. Okay. So all of that so far was just to help us factor the problem. Now what we are going to do is take each set of parentheses and set it equal to 0. So 3x minus 1 equals 0, or x minus 6 equals 0. Okay, so for this first one, I've got a two-step problem. I'm going to add the friend, plus 1 to each side. 3x is equal to positive 1. Then from here, I divide both sides by 3. And this one is not going to reduce. It's going to stay 1/3. Okay. Then for my other one, I've got a minus 6, so the opposite of a minus 6 is plus 6, which gives me x equals positive 6. So our final answer for this last one, we've got 1/3 and 6. Now, part of what you are going to turn in is this sheet of paper that you took notes on, so make sure that you upload it to my Canvas page.